Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you and call this meeting to order. If everyone could review the minutes. Okay, can you state your name for?
Joan Down in South Fort Myers High School.
Okay, we have a motion to approve. Who seconded it? Okay. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion has carried. Okay, public comment. Non-DAC members about agenda items. No one? Okay, we'll just go right into the board update with Mary Fisher. Where'd she go?
Good evening. Thank you for being here. Well, the big topic of discussion these last couple of weeks has been school safety and security, which is why Dr. Atkins and Mr. Deming are here. So I just want to say that out in the community, no matter where I go, I'm being approached and asked about, well, should we give teachers guns? And I said, well, my own personal bias is no, I don't think teachers want guns, but there's a whole lot more to the story. So we have been, of course, as you know, advocating for the half-penny sales tax, which would give us more capital funding and enable us to enhance our safety and security measures as well as maintain our buildings and build new schools, which we need because of the growth. And yesterday, I went to an event at Broadway Palm, and when I arrived, NBC was there, and so they wanted to know about reaction to the governor signing Bill 7026. And I don't want to steal their thunder, but so it's been on the minds of the board, and we've been communicating with the entire community about that. And this morning I had an opportunity to be at South Fort Myers High School. And I got there a little bit late to see what they did in response to the nationwide walkout. And I thought it was an amazing alternative to walking out in the street. And the kids were highly respectful, well-behaved, and I think they definitely made their point. So we have a little video that I'm going to let you see. It was put on Twitter and went viral very quickly.
All social media sites are verboten from
That's what normally happens to me at home, but I didn't think it would happen to the technology experts. So the kids all went out into the football field and formed a heart, and they had 17 seconds of silence, and then the lights were turned out, and they all held up their phones, their lights. And following that, there was a presentation to the freshmen and sophomores which followed a presentation that had taken place on Monday for the juniors and seniors, and it was called Minding Your Minds. And you know, there's been a lot of talk about people's mental health, and that's something that people don't talk about. So we have an organization that was hired by Lee Health, who we partner with, to come and talk to our school kids. And they attempted to reach almost 5,000 students here in Lee County this week. Again, the kids were extremely respectful, and they were almost captivated because you could see that they were thinking, wow, other people have these issues too. So that's a very important thing that we're doing, is to recognize when students are having struggles and behavioral or emotional issues, that we can intervene and help them. So at this time, in lieu of the video, if you go on your own Twitter, you can probably find it. They did put it out? Oh, okay. On our website? Oh, okay, go to the district website then. So at this time, I'm going to introduce Dr. Atkins, our superintendent, and Mr. Deming.
Yes.
Yeah, it was still.
7 a.m.
It's dark because of daylight savings.
Yeah.
The drone.
That's the drone. That was taken by the drone. Right. So it was a very respectful tribute, and I'm proud of the kids at South Fort Myers High, and even prouder of their principal, because he's rocking it over there. Dr. Atkins?
Can I just say something real quick before you start? Oh,
Sure.
I just want to say, if you have questions after Dr. Atkins speaks, there are going to be 3 live mics up here. If you could come up, state your name and school, and ask the question in the mic instead of shouting it out. We need to get it recorded, and that's the only way we can really do that.
All right, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here, although the reason why I'm here, it's, I wish it was for different circumstances, but that being said, I think you know, it's for a very important reason, and I have to start out by, I'm glad we started with the video. I wish it'd been nice to have some sound, but if you do get a chance to go on our website and check it out. And by the way, if you haven't been to our website and looked at a lot of the different media links that are on that site, there's a lot of great stories that you can pick up in terms of what goes on in our schools every single day. One of the highlights of all of this to me personally, and I know that our board and staff members, is how our students here in Lee County have responded and reacted. First and foremost, there were some walkouts that occurred right after the event, and our students that participated in those, I think, you know, really did so respectfully. Our school staffs responded extremely well. Most of them, they went out for about 17 minutes, you know, 1 minute for every life in that tragedy, and then they came right back in and got right back to the business of schools. So our students you should be proud of what our students, how they handled this difficult situation. We asked every one of our high schools to send 2 student representatives to meet with me and our staff, Lori Brooks, and we also had Ms. Giovanelli, a board member, there as well. And just to hear from students, we talked a little bit about what actions we were taking as a school district. I did talk to them a little bit about how we would behave today, or how we would treat today in terms of being just a routine day for our school district. But then we wanted to hear from our students, and our students were amazing. I mean, absolutely amazing. I think what I took away from it was that they don't just want to do something like a walkout and have it be a kind of a one-shot and over and done with. They want to make a real difference. And so we're going to come back together with them, and the real difference is about making a difference in the safety and security of Lee County, and even, you know, a bigger difference. So I think that you would be excited and you would be proud to see how articulate our students are, these student leaders, how passionate they are about this subject, and how much they want to make a change, but also how professionally and well-mannered they go about conducting themselves. I was really, I don't want to say pleasantly surprised. I was just inspired and proud by how they handled themselves. So, you know, the future, from my perspective, looks really bright if you look at it from the lens of how our students are doing. Now, as a school district, just to give you kind of a where we are today in the area of student security and safety. First and foremost, even before the tragedy, Sheriff Scott and I, approximately 3-4 weeks ago, it was literally 1 week before this happened, he and I just sat down, just the two of us, and we started talking about SROs for next year. The reason is that we really feel, both of us, that we want to make sure that we are supporting our schools in a way that they need to be supported. And one of the topics that we talked about was our high schools, particularly our large high schools. Some of our high schools are now over 2,000 students, and so we already had a plan to add an additional SRO to those high schools that are over 2,000. So particularly the ones that you see out in the East Zone, like Lehigh Senior High School is an example, you know, South High, yeah, East, those Riverdale. These are high schools that, you know, you have over 2,000 kids in them, and so we really were thinking along those lines we need to put an additional SRO in those buildings. In addition to that, the second topic that we talked about is that we are also talking to the city of Fort Myers. I've had numerous conversations over the past, really about the past year, ever since Chief Diggs took over. He's been really wanting to implement a prototype program in our schools in the city of Fort Myers. He'd like to see the presence of a Fort Myers police officer in those schools. The difficulty there for us is that we have such a long-standing positive relationship with the sheriff. And so in many cases, like let's say Dunbar High School, which is within the city limits, they currently have a deputy there, and they have a great relationship with the deputy. So we wouldn't want to replace a deputy with an officer, just a one-for-one switch, because it's already we've already got an officer in the building that has built up relationships with the staff and with our students. So you just wouldn't simply want to switch that out for the city of Fort Myers. And also, I was very candid with him. I said, you know, I was sitting in the chair really just as the acting superintendent back during the time where the city of Fort Myers, who used to have a police officer in all of our schools, pulled out. And they didn't give us very much notice at all, like about a month. And it was the sheriff's department that really came to our rescue and stepped up to the plate. And that was a different chief. It was a different city manager at the time. And so I think that Chief Diggs really does want to do some community partnering, community policing, and partnering with the school district of Lee County. So I want to honor his desire. But I also don't want to do anything that might put our kids at risk ever again, where we can't depend on one agency when we know that we can depend on the other. So what we're doing is we are, I think we got, there we go. What we're doing is we are putting together a pilot program that's going to take place at Franklin Park Elementary School and also at Fort Myers Middle Academy, and that's where we're going to have a dual presence. We're going to have both a city police officer and also we're going to have a deputy. In the case of Franklin Park, currently a deputy rotates through there. I believe she has, 4 other schools. That would be one of her schools, but then you'd have a full-time Fort Myers police officer there. And then at Fort Myers Middle School, you would have a full-time Fort Myers police officer and a full-time deputy. So that is something new that we were doing even before this. After this, we have had a couple conversations with the Sheriff's Department, with Colonel Smith, who's responsible for major crimes, and then also Captain Miller, who's over our SRO program, and met with the undersheriff today, and we are working with them to make sure that we like to put an SRO in every single one of our schools. So what we're doing right now is they are going to be costing that out for us, because that could be as many as 75 additional officers, because this is not just what we consider traditional schools that you all are very familiar with, but also our charter schools. So our charter schools also, if you look at the new piece of legislation 7026, also requires them to be assigned to charter schools as well. So that's quite a large number, 75 officers. 75 officers would probably do it in terms of covering our buildings in a way that we really want to cover them. So you would have one in every one of our schools, plus have those additional officers at those larger schools that have a larger population. They are working on getting the exact numbers to us. We're providing them the exact numbers for our student populations in each one of the schools. And then they're going to come back to us with what our timeline would look like phasing that in. So we could certainly be there. We would start doing that almost immediately, particularly at some of our schools that we already have the largest concern. And then, with the goal of phasing that in toward hopefully having full coverage no later than the beginning of school next year. That is quite an ask, because you need to consider they have to have officers trained and go through all the requirements that officers have to go through, which is quite extensive. And, it's difficult filling those positions already. The good news is they are reaching out to folks that have recently retired or have recently left their organization. They've also had police officers that have left to go to other agencies, like maybe the city of Cape Coral, for example, who might want to come back. We've already had some of those officers reach back and want to come back and become SROs with the school district and the sheriff's department. So that's some good news, that we've already had folks that are interested in taking those positions. So people ask us, Mrs. Fisher alluded to, teachers carrying guns and that type of, which is a piece of that legislation of 7026 that the sheriff, ultimately has that decision, but he would be making that decision, working collaboratively with the school board and the superintendent. And that is what they are doing. At this point, our direction, of course, I just met this morning, and I will be meeting with board members. But from the sheriff's perspective and our personal opinion, we know we can count on SROs. We know we can count on the sheriff's department. And therefore, that is where we would like to move as a school district. So that is what we're pursuing before we pursue any of this other stuff. That's where we want to go first. So, you heard it here here first at DAC. You know, this is fresh off the quote press. Again, Mrs. Fisher is here as a board member. I need to talk to other board members, but that's basically coming right from the Sheriff's Department, and they have been wonderful, wonderful partners. So that's that first piece of that legislation. The second thing that we are doing is we are doing what's called a threat assessment. This is something that we did back in, I think it was 2008, and we're turning around and doing it again. And that is where we go into buildings, and we're really looking to do an assessment in two ways. One is we're looking to assess the building itself in terms of the hardening of the structure and the security measures that are in place. And when we do that, we're talking not only just some of the physical plant, but also the technology that's in place to make sure that everything we need is safe and secure. And one of the easiest examples and one of the most important priorities would be single point of entry. So we as a school district have had this as a goal that we have been slowly moving toward over the past several years. We've almost accomplished that goal, but this has allowed us to reemphasize the importance of that and make it a major priority so we can finish that project off so that all of our buildings are single point entry. So we do have some challenges. And the challenges, you are probably aware of most of these yourself. Some of our larger high schools, such as Fort Myers High School, Cypress Lake High School, Mariner, Estero, these have these campuses that have multiple points of entry. And so it will be, it's always challenging to bring those into a single point of entry. But we can do it. You know, we had like one of our best examples, I think, the Alva School. Alva was a community school. People are used to just walking in off the street, walking their kids directly to class. That was something that the community really resisted a single point of entry. We did put one in there, and so now it operates as a single point of entry, and I think it's working really, really well. So we can get there. It just takes a bit of a culture shift, and it takes the commitment to put in the structures in place so that we can operate that efficiently. So that's the hardening of the school and the structure. The other thing that we do is we look at the other side of it. Are the students' needs being met? The teachers' needs being met? Are safety and security protocols in a building that the human beings have to follow? Are those being implemented the way that they should? So you have to check the human element of all this. I was just we were just interviewing a successful candidate. Here's another news-breaking item for you, is that we are going to be recommending to the school board at the 27th action meeting. We have been looking for a new director of safety and security. We have offered the position. The position has been accepted by the successful candidate who has a long history of safety and security, a great background. I won't go too much into it because the board I've briefed most of the board members at this point, but we should have a new safety and security director that will be starting at the very first part of April, so we're excited about that. But part of that job, and Mr. Deming's job right now, is going around and making sure that our human beings are doing what they should be doing. And what he said, the candidate, what I was alluding to just a moment ago, was that I was asking him a question about technology, because there's a lot of adaptive technology that Mr. Davis can talk to you about, Trey Davis, our Chief Information Officer, that can help warn, you literally on your phone, if you have an intruder that is deciding to come over the fence during school hours when your building is locked down, it can alert somebody, and you can now proactively go and take care of that threat versus the passive technology that we currently have deployed. So it was asking him a question about that, and the first thing out of his mouth was, well, first of all, there's no replacement for the importance of human beings and the proper supervision being followed in the school. Technology will never replace that. And then he went on to answer the question. So I thought, great response, because he gets it in terms of the importance of human beings. But part of what we have to do with any threat assessment is making sure that those type of things are being followed in a building. In addition to that, we have the majority of our schools have already received active shooter training. It was well over 85% before this even occurred, and the goal is to finish that by the end of March. So we're on track to do that. So again, we were, before this even occurred, 85% trained, which is ahead of most school districts. So we'll be 100% trained should be by the end of this month. And then that is training that we will take, that will continue on so that we can continue at that 100%. And the other thing that we've done is work with the Sheriff's Department to actually provide our buildings. They've now moved to where when they're training themselves, they are starting to train in government buildings such as our buildings so that they're very familiar with our buildings. In fact, a requirement of 7026 is that they have to walk your building within every 3 years. We will, because we've got a great partnership, they'll be in our building every single year, so that they're very familiar with it, because that was one of the issues over at Parkland, is they weren't as familiar with that campus because it had been so long since they had been there, and that will not be the case here. So I did that when I was a principal, and that's years ago, but I actively encouraged law enforcement to train in my building after hours, and therefore they were very, very familiar with that building. So we continue to do that. They are also going to continue to be great partners when it comes to providing this training moving forward. The other thing is that we are looking at our drills again. Now we currently have been conducting drills for quite some time in terms of lockdown drills, bomb drills. We always do fire drills, but somebody pointed out, we haven't had a fire that caused injury since 1953 here. But when you talk about active shooters and those type of things, you see that has continued to rise in this nation. So we have to be more prepared in that area. So we are doing that. Mr. Deming is addressing that right now. The other thing that we have to do, and we can prepare our staffs and students for this, it has to be where we're not only doing them when it's planned, but also when it's unplanned, and do it during times that are not necessarily always the most convenient for having a drill, like in the middle of lunch. Because if you're not practicing these things, that's the one thing when I tell people when I was in the Army, it was frustrating, but you do some things over and over and over and over and over again to where you just know it innately, and so when you get in a high stress situation, you know what to do, and that's the way these drills have to be. So no matter when it occurs in the day, our kids and our staff members know what to do. And then also, drills, you have to make sure you're not letting them get too routine. You have to mix things up so people are continuing to think, and because anytime you have one of these types of threats, it's always unpredictable in terms of what the outcome may be, and you have to be able to react to that unpredictable scenario. So practicing these drills in different ways so that people are prepared for different types of scenarios is very, very important. Lastly, I think that, a couple different things. I got a couple points, not just one more. Sorry. School buses is another area that we are working toward, making safer in terms of providing training for our drivers. Mr. Cody has been on top of that. So you're going to see more in the area of school bus safety, because that's one of those neglected areas, and I think that Mr. Cody will probably lead probably the state of Florida in that area. Knowing him, he's a very, very energetic director, executive director. He's been a fantastic asset, but I think that those are things that he's really on top of. One of the areas that we're starting to work that I'm really excited about this bill is the interagency attack at mental health. You know, that is something that is a real challenge in this particular area. We had a meeting with Representative Fitzenhagen recently as she's trying to prepare going back to Tallahassee to address this very issue. She had Salis Care in the room, and it's very apparent that the communication needs to be improved in terms of the agencies that are involved. So if we Baker Act a student, we need to be able to serve that student well when that student comes back to us. And right now, you know, the communication that takes place isn't what we hope it should be. So we think that this bill is going to help facilitate that. But also, we were able to make connections in that room right there that I think will help us in Lee County moving forward, because we both agencies have the same desire to improve communications. Just Salis Care has to worry about, you know, the rights of the student, as do we, and so what can be communicated to us isn't everything. You know, they can't give us the whole deal on what happened with that particular student. They're, unfortunately, you know, hands are tied in some ways, but we do think we can make improvements in that area. Lastly, we are working with TAUC SPAUC Safety Security Task Force, and you had a meeting today, and I don't know if you want to report to the group some of the outcomes of that meeting. So.
We had a TAUC and SPAUC meeting today on safety and security. Almost everything Dr. Atkins already went over is what we went over. But there's several things that they would really like to see. And that's the main thing we're working on, myself, Mark Mora, and the new safety director will be working on, is protocols that are totally updated. And updated for children and for adults. They talked about how we train adults on everything, but sometimes the kids just don't know. Threat assessment. We talked about that, maybe having an elementary video for elementary kids on what they need to do if there's a problem in their school, and a different one for middle and high school for what they need to do. But there's a lot of different things. We talked about the drills. The new 7026 laws state that we have to have as many threat assessment, lockdown drills as we have any other type of drill. Well, that would be fire drills, and we have one a month. So we will be changing that, but we're required to start that next year. We're going to start that this month. Now, I know Dr. Atkins said we're going to do some on surprise. This first one, it will not be a surprise, because we don't want these kids to freak out just a few weeks after something major happened here locally. But we want to go over what they need to do, you know, run, hide, fight, that kind of, that's the new terms that they're using now, and how they lock down rooms. Because sometimes, if it happens in the middle of the day, everyone's not going to get locked in a room. So those kids that aren't locked in a room need to know what to do. That's why Dr. Atkins also said we're going to do that during lunch period, maybe right when kids are getting off the buses on the bus ramp. We're going to make a lot of plans. But our protocols are the main things we went over, and we're going to renew all of them. Our hurricane protocols are pretty up to date. Our fire safety protocols are pretty up to date. But we really need to, and we are starting immediately. Actually, we've already started on the threat assessment protocols. And the other thing, we're going out to all the buildings and checking every building along with law enforcement to see what they need. The biggest things are the red lock system. And if you don't know what that is, that's a system that everybody can lock their door from the inside, so they don't have to go out in the hall to lock their door. We want to make sure all schools have that. We want to make sure most schools, all schools won't be possible, but most schools have single point of entry, and how we're going to do that. And then we're going to put all this together in a financial outlay project, and we're going to get it done. This is something that is important to kids. It's important to parents. And as I told a whole group of principals I talked to last week, I never went to school scared. Never went to school scared. The only thing I was scared of, I even said this, is maybe I did something wrong and the principal would find me and want to use the paddle or something like that. But I was never scared going to school. These kids, some of them are truly and legitimately fearful of being in school. So we've got to help them, and we're going to help them, and we'll make it right. Unfortunately, it won't be tomorrow, but it'll be very, very soon. Okay.
Some of the things that we'd already put in place, which I think is important, is that we had, you know, even way back, if you look at the South High incident that occurred a while ago, you know, one of the things that when I was a principal, we really emphasized active supervision on the part of every single staff member in the building. So that became something that you know, when I was a principal, I required it, but then we mandated that across the entire district. So that's something when he talks about reinforcing the current we have protocols that are in place that you have active supervision on the part of every single staff member, no matter, like if you have students coming into the school, everybody has a place that they're supposed to be. During every class change, there's a place where every single adult is supposed to be and what they're supposed to do to monitor students. And then as you exit the building, it's the same type of thing. And then you really lock down on the after-school programs, you know, so that every kid's accountable and supervised in an after-school environment as well. So those are things that we were already doing that we obviously will continue to do, but then we of course take these types of opportunities to reinforce those moments to make sure that everybody's continuing to do that. And part of what he has to do in terms of spot checking is to show up and check to make sure that those procedures are being followed in every single one of our schools. So, you know, student safety is, of course, our highest priority. And, you know, when it comes to, last thing, when it comes to the project list, you know, that we want to put out there, not only for the half-penny sales tax, but also for next year's budget. These safety and security items, you know, obviously get elevated to the top of the list, so we're able to get them taken care of, done. But not to get political, I won't, but one of the things on the project list is that the half-penny sales tax has always been the security items. And, you know, we really believe that we can do a lot right now with what we have, but we can do so much more if we're able to adequately fund our schools. And just to give you a frustrating example, that now we have money coming from Tallahassee, but here's the ugly truth. Back in 2008, the Safe Schools categorical money was a little over $2 million in 2008. This past year, 2018, it was $1.6 million. So in 2008, it was over $400,000 more than it is today. And in 2008 versus today we have 22,000 more students than we did. So that's what's frustrating. You're going to hear a lot about how much we're doing. We're putting money into student safety. That's great. But in 2008, you were spending more on safe schools than you were in 17-18. And so, you know, that's what's frustrating for us in terms of a funding perspective. You've already heard me talk about in 2006, 2007, we had $318 million in capital dollars to build schools. And last year we had $118 million. That's a $200 million reduction from what it was 10 years ago. But when you break it down to just the safe school dollars, there's yet another example. So you hear about these record budgets, but we forget that we have record numbers of students every year. So if you talk about per pupil spending, And people don't want to really talk about per pupil spending, because if we really want to talk about that, in my opinion, we're shorting our students. And we have to do better. They deserve better. And here's a great example right here of safety and security. I mean, it definitely needs to have the highest priority. I've talked a lot. I felt we had a lot to cover. I wanted to make sure you had that information, but I also want to give you that opportunity to ask questions. And here's the way it'll work. We'll ask any question. We will try to answer every single one that we can, but any one that we are not able to answer or that we have to research, Cassie will take that down, and we will come back to the next DAC meeting and provide you with an answer. Okay.
If you do have a question, we would ask that you come to either side of the podium. Just because we are recording this, we are required to record DAC meetings, so we'd ask that you come to either side of the podium, and we'll go ahead and take questions at this time.
One more thing. It's my job to also time these questions, so we have only 3 minute limit. Keep that in mind.
Larry Rubel, North Fort Myers Academy for the Arts and Psychological Services. Hi, Dr. Atkins. Hi, Mr. Deming. Dr. Atkins, you stated that you had the meeting with the sheriff regarding arming school personnel, and you said you really wanted to focus on increasing the services from our SROs first, but I didn't hear you commit, or Ms. Fisher, I'm sorry I wasn't here when you spoke earlier, I didn't hear a commitment to actively resist training school staff to carry guns in school. There were 2 accidental shootings in schools today, one in California and one in Virginia. One was by a school staff member that was trained to carry guns and was a police officer off duty. The other one was by a school resource officer. I strongly feel that we need less guns on our schools, not more guns, and I would really ask you to make that commitment to us, that you will do everything you can to keep the sheriff and the governor from forcing us to arm school staff. Thank you.
Well, it's an easy thing for me to answer. Thank you. Easy thing for me to answer personally. Personally, as I indicated before, our school resource officers is really where I believe that we have to go, and what that means is to expand on it and hit exactly on your point. I do not feel that we're in the business of arming staff and arming teachers. That is not where we should go, in my personal opinion. That's my personal opinion. I have a board. We make that decision as a team. Now, I have an opinion, or I have a feeling about where our board will be on that particular issue. But, and again, I had the conversation with law enforcement today, and that's how they feel as well. And so if you have, that's our feeling, that is the Sheriff's Department feeling, and because here's the thing, and this is the way I look at it, and it's the way Carmine looks at it, the undersheriff. We know that the most important thing for us is student safety. We know that we can count on a deputy. So if you're going to put your money on a sure thing, that's where you put your resources. So is that, hopefully that was clear enough.
Hi, Dr. Atkins and Mr. Deming. Thank you for all your dedicated work, and clearly you guys are working in the best interest of teachers, students, and parents. A quick question regarding, my name's Dante Chaffee, Fort Myers Technical College. Quick question regarding the underfunding by the state that you addressed, Dr. Atkins. I thought I heard something in the news that that's going to be revisited by the legislature and reconsidered. What's your opinion on the climate for reconsidering that? Thank you.
Well, I do think that it is being reconsidered by the legislators. I do feel that, here's one of the concerns that I have, however. I think you do see a large number of dollars that are being committed to this year. The uncertainty is that revenue stream going to continue the following year and the year after that and the year after that? I think it's important that it does. So that's my concern, is I do see that commitment now, right after this tragedy occurred, but I also want to see that commitment continue on. And also, I think we have to make sure that we have that commitment continue, but not jeopardize other things that we need to have happening. Okay, as an example, you know, the state of Florida, you know, continues to collect more revenue, but like last year, I think it was something in the neighborhood about 4% additional revenue. But the school district only realized 1.3% additional revenue every year. You know, in the last 3 years, we've always received less than what they took in. The difficulty for us is that we need to pay. What gets the job done in our school district are teachers. Teachers. And the second most important thing are principals. And right now, with our last TALC contract, we just got to slightly above the state average. It's about 55. We're at the 55 percentile. Now, we have to compete against Collier, which is higher than that. So we have to stay competitive. We have to stay competitive with how we pay our teachers and how we pay our principals. So I don't want to lose that funding all to safety. I think we need to maintain the level of funding for safety and security, continue that to be a priority, but not jeopardize funding for these other areas. Because, you know, don't get me started on that one. You know, per pupil spending, as I said before, if you Google it, the NEA, if you look at the NEA's latest, in many per pupil spending categories, we're ranked 50th. And when you're down there with Mississippi and Alabama, no offense to those states, that's not where you want to be. And any credible survey puts us in the bottom 10% of the nation in terms of per pupil spending. And we have to do better for our children. They have to go out there and compete in the global economy now. It is our duty and obligation to make sure they have what they need. So that's my concern, is that it's there today. It needs to continue and not jeopardize other funding sources for other important things that we do for our kids.
Thank you.
Good evening, Dr. Atkins. I'm from Stephanie Schiavone from Bonita Springs High School. So I was wondering what extra safety precautions you'd be using in a temporary school, because the kids are basically in a parking lot in portables.
Well, I think let me first talk about the portables and then talk about the additional safety and security that we would want to put in place there. First of all, one of the things that's important is, with this whole capital issue, is that we're actually building schools, obviously, because if we don't build schools, then what happens is we have to do more portables. I just had to approve, that's going to go before the board, a big package for portables in some of these buildings to house our students while our schools are being built, like at Bonita Springs High School. So again, we don't want to, and during the hurricane, we lost all of our portable inventory in terms of, these are portables that hadn't been deployed, and many of our portables that had been deployed, like down in, I think it was San Carlos Park, where we literally had portables that were ripped in half by the storm. So portables are not a very good solution. So what do we have to do? First of all, in buildings that have portables, what we're going to have to do moving forward is we're going to have to invest in more human capital to be able to better supervise those facilities. So safety and security specialists that schools have, we have to increase the number there. And then we have to also consider that's another reason why you want to add the additional SRO to a place like Lehigh Senior High School, because there you only have one SRO, and now you've got a bunch of portables, and you really need to have a second one because you have a population that's now over 2,000 because of the portables that are on site. The second thing that's a challenge, and this is where Mr. Davis comes in and his team, he's already looking at surveillance and what we can do with surveillance technology and alarm technology, because some of those aren't on the systems the way that they need to be. And so we have to harden the infrastructure for those buildings as well. And then finally, this is for all buildings, not just with the portables, but we have to address some of the fencing issues and gate issues at some of our buildings. So when we're talking about what are the highest priorities moving forward that get moved up, it has to do with fences and gates and proper operation of the fences and gates around buildings, so that not only just our portables are protected, but also our main structures protected. Okay?
Good evening, Dr. Atkins. Scott Hertz from Gulf Middle School. As you talk about the issue of security and the improvements, and your last answer really touched on it, how would you break down in a percentage-wise the difference between what are essentially one-time costs, like purchasing a security system or improving fences or gates, I would view as essentially a one-time cost, not that they don't have some ongoing maintenance for alarm systems, versus your need for variable or ongoing costs like a school resource officer. It's only good as long as someone's funding the officer every year. How do you view that breakdown of what Lee County's needs are for security improvements?
Well, it's a very good question, and I think that's going to be one that I will need to bring back and give you a more complete answer, because we do have that project list that yeah, he threw me a good curveball.
My reaction wasn't you; it was me. I seem to manage to ask those types of questions. Ms. Cosby was teasing me because I seem to always ask those. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. It's a good question, because you know, one of the things. Here's what's sort of humorous to me is that I was asking a very similar question to the operations team. Remember this, with, you know, kind of making Mr. Mora squirm a little bit, because he wanted to, you know, Mark is a great guy, wants to provide very, very accurate numbers on a project list. And so when you start talking about, well, Fort Myers High School, we need a single point entry, what's the cost of that? You know, he wants to put an expert out there and spend a lot of time and do the analysis that needs to happen. And I wanted a good approximation, you know, because we have to get out there and start planning for that. So we're in the process right now of updating that project list and doing our budget. So probably by the time I come back next time, I should be able to have a pretty good breakdown in terms of percentage. This is what we're going to do in the short term that's going to have this capital, because a lot of that's going to come out of the capital budget. And then this is what will be a long-term cost, because there's long-term factors such as the human capital investment, but also we have ongoing rotations such as our surveillance cameras. And just give you a great example that my staff is tired of me using. Dunbar High School has approximately 100 cameras, and those cameras have a life expectancy of 6 to 7 years. So we have to replace those, and so that's an ongoing capital cost. Now the good news is Mr. Davis just mentioned last week, I believe, that he could find where we could do a better camera at half the cost. Is that correct? Okay. Roughly, I think. Okay, so anyway, that's the good news. The bad news is that life expectancy of those cameras are ongoing. But anyway, we'll get you that. We'll get you that next time. Thank you for that question.
Hi. Shelby Vick, Colonial Elementary School. My campus is 15 different buildings inside of a very low gate. And you actually just answered my question while I was standing here, but the surveillance, I know that my principal and my assistant principal have cameras, but nobody's constantly monitoring those, and the back of our campus is wide open. Is there a plan for a human to be in place to do that, like add a security specialist?
Yeah, these security, and I can't speak specifically to your school yet. We should be able to do that when we're able to come back. So, make sure, Cassie, that we can speak to that one directly. But yes, one of the things that we're looking at are the requirements for security specialists in each one of our buildings and the ability to be able to monitor those buildings adequately. So we are looking at those requirements right now. And in addition to that, one of the things that Mr. Davis is looking at is the ability for the technology to also assist in the monitoring of those buildings, in that you can adapt this adaptive technology, and he can speak to it much more eloquently than I can. But if you have, like I mentioned before, if you have a school locked down and somebody comes over the fence, it can alert you. If there's unusual student patterns, like congregating in a certain section of the hallway when that's not something that's typically occurring, that alerts an administrator, on their phone. So you may not have somebody sitting there watching 100 cameras, but you have technology that's alerting you to a change in the environment very, very quickly to allow the administrator to be able to respond. We're going to deploy our first phase of adaptive technology in the Bonita Springs building. I don't think that's going to get to Trey's his ultimate goal in that area, but it'll take one large step in the right direction, and then we hope by the Gateway facility that will be all the way we want to be with that technology, and then we can use that and what we've learned in that to start to deploy as these other cameras systems need to be changed out. So.
Thank you, Dr. Atkins and Mr. Deming. Great presentation. Now we will have the Chromebook presentation.
How you guys doing?
Have you had better days?
I have. I don't have any audio in my presentation, though. Yeah, I don't have video either, yeah. Sure. Denise is going to be my remote control, so I'm going to put this down. Yeah, she is an expensive remote. Okay, well, thank you for your patience as we worked out our issues here. My name is Dwayne Alton. I'm the Executive Director of Infrastructure Services in the Information Systems Division. And with me tonight is Rob Stratton, who has a really long title. I think it's something like Coordinator of Instructional Technology, Media and Instructional Materials, or something like that. Okay. And Rob is sort of our partner in crime in the curriculum department. And tonight, what we wanted to talk about, we were sent some questions that you all had, and we're going to hit on the points for those questions during the presentation. But we also wanted, for those of you who haven't seen some of the other presentations, we wanted to sort of bring you up to speed a little bit on where we are with our one-to-one program. And one of the things that we like to say off the bat is we're often asked to come out here and present about Chromebooks. And really what we're talking about is not Chromebooks. It's about the instructional technology in general. The reason that people ask about Chromebooks is they see the devices, but what we're talking about tonight is really not exactly about the device. It's how we're using the technology to enhance instruction. So today, we're going to sort of tag team it, and Denise, if you would. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the devices, obviously the Chromebooks, but we're going to talk a little bit about the software, the content, and the support. I know that we had some questions about where do parents go to learn a little bit more or to help their children use the technologies that we're deploying. And the next slide, we'll talk about this is where we are today. All of our secondary schools, grades 6 through 12, we have the one-to-one implementation. This school year, we added more computers to elementary school, but we're not in a one-to-one in elementary. We're still in a shared technology environment. What we did, though, is we increased the density a little bit so that we had more technology available in those schools, but it is not a one-to-one at the elementary level. Okay, next. Okay. So Rob is going to take you through our software platforms. And again, for some of you, this may be a review, but we want to sort of take you through the platforms and the strategy behind why we use these tools.
And to kind of piggyback on the discussion earlier about the greatest resources we have, it's none of this. It's our teachers. And the work that we do is try to simplify the workflows for them so that they can get back to the business of teaching. Because my thinking around that is where we make the greatest difference with our students, is the instructional strategies that our teachers employ with them every day. So when we talk about this software, it's really around reducing friction in the classroom. And the first one is really the Google environment, giving teachers and students access to tools that are simple and easy to use and allow greater collaboration in the classroom. And then we go to Google Classroom, a simplified LMS. And the idea here is to train students on one environment, Google Classroom, and we access our resources and our assignments within that environment. And the third element of that is Safari Montage. If you step back for a minute and think about a library of resources, and I always put myself back in my classroom when I taught 3rd grade and 5th grade, and how I gathered resources for all of my lessons. And in my day, it was our school library. And Safari Montage is really that concept of a library of digital assets that are, in essence, instructional in nature. And our work with Safari Montage is really bringing content from a variety of publishers, whether it be HMH, Pearson, Safari itself, or teachers want to add their own resources. And then they compile them into a playlist of resources and push them to Google Classroom. Students access those resources from their learning environment. And then GoGuardian is really helping teachers monitor what's going on in their classrooms. And I think the one product that I'm most proud of is our implementation with ClassLink. Teachers have struggled year after year after year of getting students easy access to resources, and ClassLink is the solution that allows teachers to stop talking about the URL, what account I'm using, but really click this pretty button and you're in. And so ClassLink brings all of our resources to one location for easy access. And we're seeing every day over 80,000 users accessing ClassLink to get to their resources.
Right, and if I could add a little bit to what Rob's talked about here, some of the things that you see when we talk about friction, okay, you'll often hear us talk about reducing friction for teachers. And if we look back at some of the tools and the implementations over the last few years, we've gotten about halfway there. We still have a ways to go. But if we look at Google Apps, for example, it's built entirely around collaboration. And for most of us, when we went to school, we weren't allowed to talk to each other in school, and now we're trying to get students to work together on projects, right? Google Apps really facilitates that. Google Classroom, again, to reduce friction, we knew that as we were going to be implementing more digital content, that we needed an easy way to deliver that to students. And I don't know if anybody's worked with learning management systems before, like Blackboard, but they tend to have quite a learning curve. So again, to reduce friction, we wanted to bring in a tool that would be easy for people to use. In fact, in our pilot, when we chose our pilot schools, we actually only provided a 3-minute video as training for Google Classroom. It was that easy. Safari Montage, when we talk about content, if you remember just a few years ago, if you were in K-12, you had a list of websites you had to go to get to your content. You had to log into your Pearson site, you had to log into the HMH site, into the McGraw-Hill site. You went to YouTube to get resources, you went to CPALMS to get resources, maybe CK12, maybe Khan Academy. Okay, well, that was very, very difficult for most of our teachers to accomplish, right? We had to remember 100 URLs, and you had different usernames and passwords. What Safari Montage does is we bring that content all into one repository. So whether the manufacturer is Pearson or HMH, it's all in one place. You can search for that, build your assignments into playlists, and deliver it straight over to Google Classroom. And that's something that, for those of you who have seen that transition over the last few years, I'm sure you remember what it was like. Launchpad, or the ClassLink is what it's called. It used to be called Launchpad. We still refer to it as that. Was the single sign-on solution, right? We had to remember 100 usernames and passwords. Now we don't. You log in, you go to Launchpad, you click the icon to the application you want to use, and it handles all that in the background, so you don't have to know different usernames and passwords. So again, all of this is really built around reducing friction, because if we don't reduce that friction, we know that people won't actually use the tools. And so, like I said, we're about halfway there, right? We have still other things that we need to accomplish, and that is data aggregation from multiple systems so that teachers have a better view of what their students are doing. And I don't know if any of you have tried the Compass Report system. Has anybody tried that? Okay, that is part of what we're doing to aggregate that performance data, and you're going to see those things increase over time. And I think you're going to see a huge leap by the opening of next school year as well. Okay, so when we talk about the different levels and how we're using it, right? We implemented different strategies, a little bit different strategy in secondary than we did in elementary. But you can see our professional development, and Rob can elaborate on this, but we brought in tech leaders from each of the schools, and we provided them professional development. And with our secondary schools, that was, I think our first year was shorter than the second year, but I think we were talking about a good 9 months of training before we implemented. And then in our second year, which was high schools, pretty much an entire year before it was implemented. And then those tech leaders go back to the schools and are kind of the point person for providing that professional development. With elementary schools, we brought in 2 tech leaders. And again, you know, when you look at the number of people here and the number of hours that we've committed and that the teachers have committed, it was really impressive given that these people had to make time both in their school schedule and outside of it. And we had to bring in, obviously we brought in a lot of third-party resources to help us with the training, but we built that core within each school so that we could grow from that point.
If we just go ahead and advance to the next slide. And this is really what the training focused on. the device disappeared into the background, and the idea of focusing on instructional strategies, implementation strategies, how can we differentiate instruction, what our teachers started talking about during our training when they first came in, it was all about the device. Like day one, how do you use this? How do you use this? And we're like, yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there. You'll learn that throughout the training. And then by the end of it, it was all about how do I add collaboration to my classroom? And how do I implement this strategy? Really trying to build a more engaging classroom environment, and not one, the fear is we turn our classrooms into computer labs. And that was never the intent. The idea here is to simplify workflow, but modernize the tools that our teachers have access to. I had a green chalkboard and white chalk, sometimes yellow. And then they wheeled in the overhead projector, and we were rocking it out. We never went to overhead projector training, but we learned how to integrate that tool into our instruction. And when we bring these devices in, we really want teachers to think about, how do I use this resource to fit what I currently do in my classroom? And the challenge we make to our vendors is, our teachers shouldn't be learning integration technology standards of strategies. Your solution should fit their workflow. Teachers have behaviors that they do that are successful, and as our technology solutions helping them implement them in a better way. Think about your banking habits. In fact, I just had this conversation with my bank when she told me I had to go to a computer and log in to look at my account. And I go, a computer? I do it all on my phone. They have simplified banking in such a way that we manage it all on our phones. I don't ever go to a bank anymore. So really, when we look at the tools that we're giving our teachers, are we really fitting the behaviors that they do every day to make our students more successful? Here, I'll do this. Click, click. And then we looked at these specific applications, right? Google Classroom, certainly that was a large part of it, making sure that they were comfortable. And what our teachers learned around all of this training is they had to adapt. Because every day when we first started with Google Classroom with our middle school teachers, they were like, boy, I really wish it could do this. And they were providing feedback back to Google, and they would come back and the next time, guess what showed up in Google Classroom this week? The feature that they had just asked for. So one of the things, I think they've become far more adaptive as technology updates within their classroom. So these are the applications and the areas that we focused around with them. Again, moving away from how to use the device, but really how to integrate that into our current workflows.
Right, and so we did have a question that was passed on to us. What can parents do, or how do parents find out more about Chromebooks? And I think the way that it was phrased is, if a parent wants to help somebody with a Chromebook and they're not familiar with that device, how can they help them? Well, the good news is if the parent is familiar with any computer with a web browser, they're already familiar with a Chromebook. Okay, the Chromebook is essentially a computer with a web browser, and all of the information is accessed. Now, how do they gain access to those tools? Some of the things that we do encourage, and I think some of our schools host parent nights for these kinds of things. I know that my daughter's school does. And what they do is they talk about, how do I access, or as a parent, how do I access my students' grades? How do I access information about how they're doing? By the way, how can I have my child show me what they're doing in Google Classroom? Google Classroom integrates with a calendaring system, so that if a teacher puts an assignment in there and the due date will show up on the calendar, well, as a parent, how do I watch that? So we do depend upon our schools to do a lot of that support with the parents on the front line. But we do have a website, and it's really hard to spell. It is globally. There are 2 L's, that's why it's hard to spell, globally.leeschools.net. Now, this site's been up there for a couple of years. I don't know if, we used to promote it on the front page of the district website quite a bit, but we have a few resources up there to help parents out. We have a parent guide, which is, you know, really around the appropriate use and that kind of thing, and you know, teaching your child about responsibility with the expensive devices that we provide. We have some frequently asked questions. We have some about the implementation. We also have frequently asked questions about some of the technical items, okay, about connecting to home Wi-Fi, that kind of stuff. We also provide links to the a parent guide to internet safety. And we use some very nice and vetted resources for providing parents information on how to work with their child, because as we know, oftentimes our kids are sometimes a little quicker than us when it comes to using their technology and both appropriately and inappropriately, right? So we want to give people some guides on how to work with children, as well as information on how to deal with social media in, you know, the 21st century here, how to help children and guide them through a lot of the pitfalls that go along with you know, social media and texting and all those things. So those resources are up there as well. We also provide a link to low-cost internet, a program that is offered through by Comcast in Lee County for parents that may be in lower income brackets, can't afford internet at home. They offer a $10 a month program, and it provides the internet connection and the Wi-Fi router for $10 a month. So we wanted to put those resources out there for you guys. If there are people that are more interested in getting into the depth of the software, one of the greatest things about the Google Apps ecosystem is that Google has all the training you could possibly want online. And of course, Google owns YouTube, so you can find out anything you want to know about how to use Google Docs, how to use Google Sheets through YouTube. So we think that most parents that have worked with like a Microsoft Suite or a Google Suite will find it very familiar, but if for people that do need additional assistance, we wanted to provide those resources up there, and we'll continue to add to that site over time as well. We do also, just so you know, in the summertime, we often publish webinars that are available to families. Okay, and that's around some of our instructional tools. So last year we did, I don't know, probably 50, 60 between optional webinars for teachers and optional webinars for parents and families last summer. And, you know, we'll do that again where we bring in some of the vendors that provide the solutions, and they provide a, you know, a virtual training so that you can learn more about those products and how they work. And then we did have one question.
I wanted to address the question around print and digital living together. And the issue there is how much do we respect our teachers and our students, and we want to give them options. And so we did not pull print out of their classrooms. We want schools to decide when print is appropriate and when digital is appropriate. And what we're finding is schools, during the adoption process, they're making choices. The committees are making recommendations. For example, in high school, when they looked at some of their courses for social studies, they wanted to make sure that they had a print class set for every teacher, and then additional copies for students who struggled with digital. And so it's more about respect than it is pushing them towards a particular solution. And that's really why you see both living, to give teachers opportunity to make the shift. Some of us still keep a bank register. In fact, the lady from SunTrust schooled me on why she still keeps a bank register. I'm like, I don't know what that is. So, you know, it allows people to move in the direction that fits their style. And we certainly don't want to negatively impact the instruction that's going on in our classrooms. We want to continue to support and enhance it.
And when we started this a couple of years ago, we had a conversation both at some of the DAC meetings and also at some of our board meetings when we were talking about this. And we said that we're not going in and taking out all the print and replacing everything with digital. That mix will shift over time. It used to be mostly print and a little bit of digital. Now it's more digital and less print. But our goal was never to take away all print. If you look at some subject areas, for example, math, okay, a lot of teachers still prefer workbooks for math. It doesn't mean they're not using the digital tools too, but it means that they're using both in combination. And so we didn't go in there with the goal of just taking away all the other resources that teachers had. And you know, that shift will continue. You're going to see it more digital in secondary than in elementary, right? We still have, in secondary, in media centers, we're using ebooks more. Okay, in elementary, you're still seeing class sets of books and traditional media centers. So it wasn't ever the goal to get rid of all of the paper. It was to modernize the tool set, and then over time, the tools that work the best would shake out, and you'll see that that today that mix is probably 70-30 digital when we buy our materials.
Any questions?
Any questions, go to the podium.
Hey, make it an easy one.
Scott Hertz from Gulf Middle. Where are you at in the process, or where are the textbook manufacturers at in the process of them becoming more interactive? I know when I watch my son do homework, to me, the textbooks he uses on his Chromebook is essentially a large PDF file, and then he's having to get a piece of paper to fill out quizzes, or there's multiple choice questions, but he's having to write down the answers. And so now it's this combination of what's going on. And a second question, which you've touched on, is to what degree do you see students carrying a Chromebook that has the digital book on the Chromebook, but then they're also having to in their backpacks, which now seem heavier to me than when I just carried books. They're carrying the Chromebook and the books, and I think that's some of the question I hear parents, people asking about that mix of digital and print. Thank you.
So it's actually a big question. The first one being, where are the publishers? Well, the publishers are obviously in different stages, right? I don't know how many of you know much about how the publishers are, their organizations are structured, but most of these were companies that acquired other companies that acquired other companies. So you'll see that some divisions within, for example, Pearson or HMH, they were further along than others, okay? HMH recently purchased Scholastic. Some of the Scholastic stuff wasn't quite up to where HMH was, and they're working to integrate those things in there. Now, when you talk about the interactivity of the digital content, so we have a lot of digital content which we'd say is what we call flat. It's basically like an electronic book. That's not the direction we're trying to push. Now, you'll see a lot of that, especially in older adoptions, right? Because we go through the content adoptions every 5 years. So if you have something that was adopted 4 years ago, the vendors, out of the goodness of their heart, are not going to come and say, here's all new product for you because you bought from us 4 years ago. So what you'll see is as the adoptions go on, the quality of the electronic materials sort of improves. Now, the interactivity, we have some solutions that are very interactive. Okay, so if you look at some of the Compass assets, for example, those are very interactive, and they provide. And as a student goes through that activity, it's branching. It's assessing how the student's doing on the activity, and it is changing the path that they're going on, and providing formative data as they go through that activity. Okay, so that's what we would call one of our higher end type of content, which is our interactive content. So you're going to see that majority of the companies have a mix across their product lines. It's getting better. We're still a few years away from where everything is going to be interactive, and it's going to provide teachers immediate feedback. Now, what we are doing is every year we push those vendors further. So we say, here's the line you have to meet, and every year that line goes higher. And we expect them, and that's in several areas, not just the quality of the content, but the quality of their integrations. For example, if we want Compass information, we can get Compass information coming back in near real time, and we can put that into the tool formerly known as Compass Reports. Now it's called Classroom Analytics. And so what that is doing is we're taking the assessment data from STAR and we're assigning learning paths, if the teacher so chooses, to have them follow that learning path. And if they follow that learning path, that data will come back. Okay, we want that full circle from all of our vendors. We're still a few years off from where everybody's going to be there. Now, as far as the balance for a digital textbook, you know, how many of them are carrying digital textbooks? We're not intentionally going out and buying digital textbooks. We're buying learning objects, typically. So we don't go and say, hey, we want a linear textbook, just make it a digital copy. Now, some of them provide that, especially on the older adoptions where we initially bought print and they provided a digital copy. It was usually a flat copy of that. Our goal is, though, as we go through these adoptions, where available, we try to go to more interactive content and not to go to the flat content. So you're going to see a mixture of that depending on the age of the content and the manufacturer. I don't know if that answers it completely.
And I'll kind of go back to the adoption process and the committee selection. So I work with each subject area as they go through the adoption process. And committees, we meet, we talk about it, they hash it out. And a lot of times, where they are today is they may see a full digital solution presented to them, and they think about teachers. And they go, you know what, I might be ready for that today, but everyone's not ready for that. So sometimes the committee will make a recommendation thinking about the group as a whole. And that really speaks to the value that our teachers put on everybody. They respect everybody and they think about what can everybody handle. And so sometimes the committee limits how far they're going to push the group. And you know, I saw that with the Social Studies Committee, and I saw that with the Science Committee this year.
Jeremy Deeringer, Mariner High School. Dr. Atkins made a point earlier to state per pupil spending being a concern. All of the technology and the applications are fantastic. However, limited access or accessibility to those apps while they're in the classroom through connectivity issues is a concern, especially at a secondary level when we've got larger student populations, we've got the standardized testing and all of the stuff that happens at a secondary level. What is the district's commitment budget-wise as well as long-term plans for infrastructure to ensure that they have the accessibility and the connectivity to run these applications when our everyday lives seem to be, the more apps, the more problems? Thank you.
So our commitment to infrastructure, we actually, that's a big question too. So we invest, I'll say millions a year in infrastructure. Now, if you're experiencing connectivity issues at your school, that should not be the norm. That's something that you need to report to your tech person, have them have them send in a ticket to us to have them look at it. What we typically do for your infrastructure is we put in, we have wireless access point in every classroom. Okay, each one of those wireless access points is designed to handle approximately 100 connections. We definitely put more capacity in there in a typical environment than you would need for your classroom, so that in the event that there's a failure, the devices will talk to a wireless access point in an adjacent room. The infrastructure in your building is all high-end Cisco gigabit infrastructure. It's very, very good equipment. So if you're experiencing an issue, which again, that should not be the norm, so we need to know about that if you're experiencing an issue in your classroom. And we have a process to, we can go out and assess that very quickly. Our staff can do it our staff can go out. We have the engineers on staff. We also stock the equipment in case we have to augment the coverage in a specific area. Now the exceptions would be outdoor areas. We don't cover the outdoors of the campus. We cover the instructional areas. So, but our commitment is always to provide enough infrastructure for those tools. Now, we monitor that infrastructure. We monitor the performance all the time. And I'll give you, we just pulled a report, just so you know, interesting statistic. Even with the hurricane, where we had power issues throughout the county for a better part of a week, our overall network uptime was still above 99%. And if you take the hurricane out of there, we're at 99.99%. So the overall availability of the network, obviously, very important. Performance of the network is very important. So I get the feeling that you had some issues out there, and we'd like to take a look at them for you.
Jillian Young from Spring Creek Elementary. In regards to the parent guide and the parent guide to internet safety, will you be providing those in Spanish?
The parent guide, I believe, is already in Spanish and Portuguese. No, Spanish and Creole, sorry. The other resources, the parent guide to internet safety, is actually a third-party website. So I'm not certain if they're in multiple languages, but if Cassie wants to take that down, I'll look and see.
Wonderful. And if nobody else has a question, I have a second question. You mentioned streamlining, using this tool to streamline the process in the classroom for teachers. How much time do you think that utilizing all of the apps in the Chromebook, say for an elementary school teacher, would take using the Guardian platform and creating these playlists and things like that?
Time saved, oh man, that's different by each teacher. I don't know if you want to try to take a stab at that, Rob, but.
I think the way the system is built is we really relied on a collaborative structure where not every teacher is building everything. So during a PLC, right, we're talking about, in fact, when I'm out at schools training, I spend quite a bit of time out really around our Compass implementation. And when I'm out there, the discussions I have with teachers is during PLC time when you're talking about what are the skills our students are ready to learn and what are the, it always comes down to, well, where are the resources? And the structures that we built allow a teacher to pull resources and then share them out, whether it's inside Compass itself or Safari Montage, whatever it is, instead of every teacher doing everything, it's working a little smarter around, let's pool our resources, let's identify what are the skills we're going to teach this week and find those resources. And if we're using Google Classroom, it's a push of the button to Classroom from Safari Montage. So ideally, I would like to get all this to minimal work for the teachers. And, you know, the work that we do with Renaissance and Compass Learning, automated learning paths based on their most recent STAR test. No work done on the teacher's part other than making sure students really did their very best while they took that STAR reading or STAR math test. So how much time is saved, I can't tell you. Our intent is to really reduce how much time teachers are out looking for resources. And I know what my wife does at her school and what her teachers do is they're all over the place scouring the web, searching.
Right.
I'm going to go to Teacher Pay Teacher, I'm on YouTube, I'm wherever I can to look for resources. And I think our work is to provide our teachers with quality content so they don't have to search. And if we can simplify how they get to it and how they make it available to their students, which is the work of Safari Montage and Google Classroom, then it will reduce their work time.
I have another question too. That's okay. Some of the parents at our school, and my daughter is in 2nd grade, I'm sure this has been addressed, but if we could just address it one more time, about the physical and emotional implications of having a lot of screen time with impulse control. My daughter complains of her neck hurting from looking down at the device, and just eye fatigue and all of that. So what can we do to train teachers to look for those signs? In my home, we have no screen time during the week because I know she gets a lot of Chromebook time at home or at school. So what can we do to equip the teachers to look for those symptoms and maybe lessen time on the Chromebook?
So certainly within professional development opportunities, we should address how much time students are spending on. And if you remember back in my discussion around our fear, is we were going to turn our classrooms into computer labs.
Right.
To me, that is a real fear. Our students need to be far more engaged with each other and their teachers than a device. And I hope that teachers are mindful about mixing up the routines. And you know, that kind of goes back to what happens when we schedule computer lab time, right? Then we're locked into this long length of screen time. And so that's a struggle for teachers as well. I get the resource for a short amount of time or for a half hour, an hour, and I'm going to use it to the maximum of my ability. And our idea is really, this is resources here. Oh, I need something. I can go get it and then get back with the group.
Okay. Thank you.
And I'll go back to our work with Innovative Designs for Education. That was the company that we partnered with to provide our Chromebook training. It was nothing, it was really about strategies that engage students where the device was just the secondary resource that they got to.
Lori Smiley, I represent Lee Virtual School, but I also happen to teach at Varsity Middle. So 2 questions for you. You talk about a Google Classroom being an LMS. Would you talk about the integration with Castle and Focus? And second, a new teacher comes into a school. Give me an overview on who's supposed to train that teacher on all these different pieces of technology, please.
Do you want to start or you want me? Okay. So I'm sorry, can you go to the first part of the question? Focus and
first one, Focus, Castle, integrated with Google Classroom and the grading and that.
Okay, so so Focus is our student information system, right? So a lot of that information is shared over to Castle and other applications, and we also use it for rostering in all of our applications what comes from Focus. For example, if you remember a few years ago, you'd have to go in and enter your students in all the applications, and so the applications now, we get that information directly from Focus and what's called One Roster. It's a standard for moving that information around. As far as Google Classroom in Focus, there's no integration between those 2 applications. We're hoping that Focus will eventually support grade passback, but we're working with them on that, and they're not there yet. And grade passback is where if I assign an activity in one application, it can send the grade over to the grade book instead of the teacher having to enter the grade manually. As far as who is responsible for providing the training, typically that's going to be the technology leaders in the school. If you're in a middle school or high school, there should be 4. If you're in an elementary school, there should be 2. Additionally, the tech person can provide additional assistance. They're not going to, in most cases, the tech person is non-instructional staff, so they're going to be able to help with the mechanics of how to access the applications. But the leaders, the technology instructional leaders, would be the ones that would provide guidance on the methodology and the model that we trained with IDE. So.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, do we have any public comment from non-DAC members about non-agenda items? Oh, yeah, and make sure, if you didn't sign in, the sign-in tables are in the back. I want to thank everyone for being indulgent with us and not having the breakout groups tonight, but I feel that Dr. Atkins and Mr. Deming's presentation was very important in the light of what's going on right now. So, anything for good of the order? Okay, motion to adjourn has been made by Andy Erickson. Second by Scott. All in favor? Aye. Okay. See everyone in April.